One of the things I liked from vanilla was how there was an overall two types of explosives. Dynamite tended to be all about damage and had a wide area of effect, while bombs per se tended to have a narrower area of effect and a brief incapacitate effect attached to them. Dynamite was generally made out of nothing but gunpowder and cloth, which, by the by, is nothing like how dynamite is made in real life, but whatever, while bombs tended to have some metal in them. Adding an incapacitate effect to a bomb might be okay for higher level recipes, but for the low end stuff I wouldn't want that. So to start out the progression of professions, I would have Easy Throw Dynamite 3 as one of the first bombs you could make, and that would have a wide area of effect, and then I'd have a single target damage dealing weapon as a Nickel Revolver, a pistol that uses the rogue pistol shot animation. But then I'd want ways that an engineer could build on the dynamite and the revolver that involve gems, believe it or not, which brings me back into reagents. I'd also bring back gems as mineable reagents and have them appear in more recipes as common items. I'd also give the gems names that imply they have other potential effects. For instance, for the green common level gems, here are the names I'd give them. For red, I'd use blood tourmaline. For orange, I'd use Fiery Tiger Eye. For yellow, I'd use Ansha's Tear. For green, I'd call them Acid Crystals. For blue, I'd call it Frost Turquoise. And for purple, I'd call them Alkaline Crystals. These imply elemental or chemical effects and could easily combine with the revolver and dynamite to make new variations. For instance, imagine combining a frost turquoise, some cold molts, a nickel revolver, and maybe some other reagents, and getting a gnomish freeze ray out of it. It would have a set number of charges, deal some frost damage, and randomly slow or snare a target. You never know quite how much it slows a target. It would be random. Or imagine combining an acid crystal with the dynamite and getting corrosive dynamite, which lowers the armor of the target. While I'm on the subject of different things that could be done with these damage tools, I'd like to point out that in Vanilla and the Burning Crusade, there was a real, flavorful difference between Goblin engineering and Gnomish engineering. Goblin engineering provided a lot of bombs, often with better or more varied effects than baseline bombs, while Gnomish engineering had more varied gadgets, including a net launcher, a shrink ray, and to balance it all out against the bombs, a powerful death ray. Actually, a lot of professions had similar specializations to them, like armor crafting versus hammer crafting for smiths, or tribal versus primal leatherworking. Most of these specializations have gone away over the years, but Gnomish versus Goblin engineering never did. Though Blizzard hasn't done a single thing with that dichotomy since Mists, and even then it was purely a cosmetic difference in Mists, and didn't have the difference in flavor that we'd gotten in earlier content. Personally, I think they should bring this dichotomy back, along with all the associated flavorful differences. Another thing that was promised in Cataclysm that Blizzard never delivered on was light-based technology from Gnomish engineering, and this would be the perfect opportunity for that. For instance, Anshe is the Tauren name for the sun, which is heavily associated with the holy light as far as the Tauren are concerned. Combine an Anshe's Tear gemstone and maybe some other components with a revolver and you get a holy-based light ray gun. Use it on an enemy and it deals some holy damage. Maybe to give it some extra flavor, have it stun demons, undead, and aberrations. Use it on an ally and they get a shield on them. Give the ray gun recipes to Gnomish engineers and the specialized dynamite recipes to Goblin engineers and you lay the foundations for specialized engineering once again. And you generate a lot of variety in the items you're allowed to craft, which is something that Legion kind of lacked. And there's plenty of opportunity for story behind how your trainers are inventing these weapons as you go. And this is only what we're doing for the first metal and uncommon gems. Drag rare gems and the next few metals into this, and the game begins to look a lot more interesting. For instance, let's say that true copper grenades are something that you get when you're 40 to 50% of the way through engineering's progression. And the true copper grenade would have a narrower area of effect and a 1.5 second incapacitate effect on it. But now imagine what you can combine with this, especially if you take into account rare gems and even reagents that you already have. Once again, Gnomish light-based technology can come into play to make a holy hand grenade. Imagine something like this. You create a specialized Gnomish energy pylon, an intermediate part that's specific to Gnomish engineering recipes, and then use a rare level gem called a golden diamond, combined with a Gnomish light ray or two, and a whole bunch of true copper grenades. Out of this, you get a large supply of holy hand grenades that can heal an area of allies as well as dealing holy damage. Not to be outdone, the goblins come up with some works of their own in the healing department, taking carbonated healing potions, yes, I'm calling them carbonated because why not, combining them with a goblin-specific reagent called Goblin Gun Cotton, some other reagents, and creating a healing spray gun. There's plenty more you can do here too. Throw in an Amethyst of the Void for a Gnomish Void Ray trinket, throw in a Lava Pearl Orange Gem for a Goblin Dragon Gun Mark III trinket. There could be ice grenades, return of goblin landmines, and more. And this isn't even getting into the other gizmos that may or may not depend on your gnomish goblin specialization, like repair bots, stealth items, elemental deflectors, and more. You may notice that two of the coolest trinkets ever, the gnomish death ray and the goblin rocket launcher, aren't in this. I'm saving those for later patches. Another thing that kicked ass was having a reward at the end of your progression that helps with gearing. The epic guns at the end of the Wrath of the Lich King expansion, and the goggles at the end of pretty much every expansion are examples of that, and I liked how we could make goggles for other classes that did something when you clicked on them in Legion. I'd like to expand on that in two ways. First, I'd like to have other gear slots that we could fill, and second, I'd like to add some customizability in what these items could do. So here's how I would do things. Have a set of goggles where you can make early on, and maybe I'd bring back cogwheels so that you can pick what stats you'll get. The stats will be equal to each other, i.e. you can't have 750 crit and 250 versatility, it'd be 500 of each, which has some itemization drawbacks and pluses. Anyhow, there's something else you can do with these goggles. There's a special slot in them that lets you put any click and it does something engineering item into them that you want. Want the ability to slow enemies? Mount in a gnomish freeze ray. It's unpredictable but useful. Want the ability to deal a burst of damage in an area? Load up some caustic dynamite. Want an extra heal? Load up a healing sprayer. Probably you'd need to consume some kind of mounting item or auto-reloading item in order to do this, but it's got a lot of possibilities. And I'm thinking that once you set this up and consume the mounting item, you no longer need to worry about running out of charges. Anyhow, having a cloth, leather, mail, and plate version of these items has a lot of potential. But imagine being able to do this with both a glove item and a goggle item. The possibilities would be pretty vast here. On top of that, imagine if there were a version of the Reeves piloted combat mode that allowed you to mount different items into it and choose which abilities you mount into the combat form. That would actually allow you to spec out your payload for different purposes. And of course, now that artifact weapons are on their way out, craftable guns would be back with a vengeance. Probably craftable gun upgrades as well, such as scopes and maybe other useful gadgets. Of course, you can't get into crafted items without getting into the upgrade system that's been in place since Warlords of Draenor. One thing that I understood from Legion but still didn't like was Obliterum. Basically, that was an excuse to make a bunch of craftables that you knew you weren't going to use, and then sacrifice the ones that didn't have the stats you wanted to make upgrade materials for the one piece whose stats you did want. Making things with the express purpose of destroying them for Regents seems a little tacky to me. Sure, creating a lot of the massive final item in your progression helped with leveling your skill up to make a lot of them, but I think that adding recipes can fill that gap in without creating things that you know will be useless. That said, I did like the ability to upgrade my gear in general. So what I'd like to see in Battle for Azeroth is the return of gear upgrade tokens, items that are specifically made to upgrade crafted gear. This would allow crafted gear to keep up with raiding gear. And I'd be sure to give it names that make sense, such as the Nickel Hardware Patch, True Copper Hardware Patch, etc. Every patch would have new recipes for each profession, and probably a few materials along the way. Patch 1.8 would allow the player to combine the hot, cold, flowing, and crackling motes into fused fire, fused earth, fused water, and fused air, and those could be used for any number of new recipes, including making orichalcum. And remember the empowered motes I told you about in my elemental reagents vid? Patch 8.2 would include those, and with them bring in fused light, fused shadow, fused life, and fused mana. Those could combine with any number of other items for some amazing effects and new craftables, or new upgrade tokens that can bring items even further along. Imagine combining several ray guns together in a future patch to create the Gnomish Death Ray Mark II, or combining spray guns and explosives to make the Goblin Rocket Launcher Mark II. Those were some kick-ass trinkets from Vanilla and the Burning Crusade, and they would be awesome making a comeback. Patch 8.3 could include new metals that the 4 super elements could deal with. For instance, combine Orichalcum with Fused Light to get Light Pewter. Fused Shadow in Orichalcum gets you Shadow Brass. Fused Mana plus Orichalcum gets Mana Bronze. And Fused Life plus Orichalcum equals Life Billion. Each one of those is an alloy of copper. I looked them up. You can tell I'm putting a ton of thought into all this. Maybe too much, but the point here is to keep the new content and new resources coming, which Blizzard hasn't done that great a job of historically, especially with engineering. The key here is variety, having a lot of different reagents that each have their own flavor and uses, and also having a lot of different craftable items that again have their own flavor and uses. This is a more is more philosophy that doesn't shy away from complexity as long as the complexity helps with flavor. One more thing to think about is recipe ranks. As a general concept, I was okay with recipe ranks and they made sense in story. As you get better at your profession, you need fewer reagents to build your items. It made sense and made things less expensive in the long run. But there was one downside. It gave the Blizzard item designers a way to have fewer craftable items while still having ways to reward players with new recipes. Having fewer craftable items cuts into the variety, and that is something I don't want. So provided that the variety is good, I wouldn't mind having multiple ranks of recipes. However, I wouldn't want to end there. Personally, I'd like professions to be just a little more open-ended and having possibilities that Blizzard can add to these professions with little worry about making any one profession overpowered or overburdened. So here's what I would do to cap off professions, add even more variety, and still not make anything imbalanced. I'd have recipes that specifically create items that are made to be transmogs. No stats on them, the item level doesn't even matter, but you go to a transmogrification NPC and you can make your character look awesome. Some weapons that are tough to get or that aren't even available in the game anymore would be perfect for this. And why stop there? There are some vanilla armor pieces that are expensive on the auction house because they're so rare and yet have a distinct color scheme. Those would be excellent candidates for transmog gear as well. Blizzard could also make all new weapons or armor pieces to make those available for transmog recipes as well, or add recolorings of older weapons or armor. It'd add ways for different reagents to have a use, even if Blizzard doesn't want to add new stats or new gadgets to the game. It would add ways for players to make a profit through professions. It would add visual variety for everyone. And it would add ways for Blizzard to reward odd or older content or even time walking. This is what I'm really hoping for in professions. Elemental reagents and a huge variety of useful craftables are close seconds. But this, transmog gear, would make professions absolutely awesome in Battle for Azeroth, and I very much hope Blizzard seriously considers this.